Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this talk on the opportunities for mechanical engineers in a sustainable resources future. Thank you for coming. This webinar will be recorded and will be sent round later via the email you registered with. My name is Kate Doyle. I'm a member of the IMechE Yorkshire Process Industries Division, and I'll be chairing this event and moderating the Q&A at the end. This presentation will discuss the drivers in waste and resource management and review what is currently happening around the world to suggest as the need to be sustainable rapidly increases. Our speaker is Allan Barton, who has worked in the resource and waste sector for over 30 years and now leads Arup's resource and waste business sector. Among many other roles, Allan is a member of the IMechE Process Industries Board and chairman of SEAB Power Limited. He has considerable experience in the global resource and waste sector. You can use the chat box to ask questions throughout the talk, and we will try and get through as many as possible at the end of the event. So I will now pass you on to Allan. I hope you enjoy this event.
Good afternoon. Welcome to a conversation, really, about the future of our planet's resources. I work for an organisation called Arup. Our vision is we shape a better world, and this was one of our first major projects because we were the consulting engineers that worked out how on earth we could build that structure. We are involved in anything in the built environment, from an Olympic park to a very tall building to a bridge to a tunnel. And I lead the resource and waste business, and we do consulting on a wide range of waste activities. So if you happen to live in Nairobi and you want to know what to do with the waste from the Dandora dump, you could probably talk to us as we have had that conversation. And we get involved with building infrastructure. We were the designers of this very iconic sewage sludge treatment facility in Hong Kong. So we get involved in both talking about activities, but equally helping people build them. So that's Arup. I just wonder how many of you recognise this picture? It was taken on Apollo 8 in December '69, and that's the first time mankind took a picture of the planet Earth. And it made us realise that we do live on a pretty small ball in a fairly enormous universe. I always think it's a good idea, and that is our home, and our home needs your help. I think it's always good to look back in time in history, and for millions of years, mankind was a hunter-gatherer. Our impact on the planet was pretty minimal. We did leave a few bones and a few pictures in caves, but not much more than that. We then developed an agricultural revolution where we learned we could grow crops and have a more sustained food stream. And population grew, and we started living in groups, and society started to form. Next major event was the Industrial Revolution, where we learned that we could use the planet's resources to our advantage. And if you look at some of the major events in waste, 500 years BC, first landfill probably. In 1200, the French passed a law to say that you shouldn't throw your waste out of a window. And the French, again, first collection of waste was in 1500. And in Nottingham in the UK, we built the first incinerator. And this is a picture of what life was like when I was 10. It was pretty simple. For those that don't recognise, there's a slide rule in the middle, and that's what we used to do our calculations. The first supermarket opened. And even if you look at our watches, again, we're fairly simple compared with what we've got today. In waste terms, we had organic packaging. We did a lot of composting. Certainly, in the back end of the war, we were still growing a lot of our own food. And we brought pieces of equipment that you could repair. and would last a long time. Our dustbins were mainly full of ash from fires. And we had this gentleman, which is a rag and bone man. And I used to be petrified of this gentleman when I was 10, because my mummy told me that if I was a bad boy, she'd sell me to him. So whenever I heard his cry of rag and bone, I used to go and hide. And we lived what is referred to as a linear economy. We took materials from the ground, we made them something, and we disposed of them. Straight line, whatever. And what's happened since then? Well, in the 70s, we built even more transfer stations to move our waste away from cities. We built landfills, we built incinerators. In the 80s, we started recycling. In the 90s, we started building new technology to help us, mechanical biological treatment plants and anaerobic digestion of food waste. And in the 2000s, we started talking about zero waste. A lot of this in Western Europe was driven by an enormous amount of legislation. And we've been on a bit of a trajectory. We've focused on recycling, we then focused on avoiding landfill, and we focused on zero waste and carbon, and now we're focusing on the circular economy. And the circular economy basically says we should make things go round and round, obviously, and we should continue to use our resources over and over. If you say, where are we today? Well, this is my view. Might discuss some of the countries, but if you're green, you're probably living in a fairly advanced waste society. If you live in the amber, you're trying to do something, but you've still got a way to go. China is building waste to energy plants quite quickly, but they've certainly got issues, what I would refer to as upcountry in rural areas. Russia is trying to get there as well. But if you're in the red, you really do need some help. Did some time in Mexico, and there's still open dumping of waste in Mexico. There are landfills, certainly near Mexico City, those landfills are getting full, and they're desperately trying to understand what to do, and they're struggling to get infrastructure built. But what is for sure is that all nations that I'm aware of aspire to do something, including the areas in the red. And if you look at the developed nations in waste terms, what do they do? Who's leading the field? Well, to me, Western Europe is leading the field. It's had the strongest legislation for the longest amount of time, and it's developed an integrated approach of recycling and anaerobic digestion and technologies and waste to energy. That nice little upside down saucer. If you go to Southampton, you'll see that on the opposite side of the Solent. And we have this sort of approach. We starting at the top in the middle. We get our raw materials, we use them, and then we discard them. And we do collect some, obviously recycling, and we collect metals and plastics and glass mainly. And we do collect kitchen and green waste, and we put that either into composting or anaerobic digestion, and we make power. But the residual fraction, we can put it through some form of treatment process to separate more metals and aggregates fairly easily. But the challenge is, what do you do with the residual fraction? Well, you can put that into a thermal treatment plant, because the option is you either put it into a thermal treatment plant or it goes to landfill. And landfill, because of the organic material in there, produces a large amount of methane. Unless that's collected, it goes into the atmosphere, which is pretty bad. If you say, what does a waste to energy plant look like? Well, if you go into the market and have a competition amongst architects to design a waste to energy plant, this is what you get. And this is in Copenhagen. So next time you go and have a look at the Mermaid, look across the other side of the estuary and you'll see this facility, and it's turned into a ski slope as well. What's inside there is a pretty sophisticated Rankine cycle thermal treatment plant. Yes, there's a grate that burns the waste, and then there's a boiler that grabs the heat and puts it into steam and makes electricity. But then there's an enormous flue gas cleaning plant, because the emission limits for a waste incinerator are some of the most stringent in the world. There's also mechanical biological treatment plants, and this facility is the river is the Thames, and it's one that's got my name written all over it. And it takes waste, it puts it in a very big hall, and it dries that waste. It gets rid of probably 25% of its mass as water, and sits there for 14 days, and then you can refine that material into a number of waste streams, including a refuse-derived fuel for making energy. We have a large number of sorting facilities now, and these sorting facilities are obviously our commingled dry recyclate material, which is hopefully clean, gets separated in one of these. And there is a raft of technologies. Obviously, the anaerobic and composting ones are there, and then mechanically treating waste, and then we get the thermal processes at the top. I would make the point that large-scale pyrolysis, gasification, and plasma gasification, you really should talk to someone that knows about those before you even embark upon thinking about them, because they have been very problematic. But if you say what's the best in Europe, if you just take the top 10 countries that have moved away from landfill, they've got a combination of activities. Probably about 22% is biological, 33% is recycled, 40% is incinerated, and 7% goes to landfill. Now, if you talk about the developing nations, what do? Well, I think this chart is quite important. The one on the right is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the one on the left is the waste hierarchy, and we are trying to move up that hierarchy away from disposal, away from energy recovery, into recycling and composting and reuse and waste prevention. And the point about the developing waste nations is, if you're at the bottom of Maslow's triangle, i.e. you haven't got anything to eat or somebody's shooting at you, you are not particularly too concerned about waste. And it's only when you get to the top of the triangle that you do start to put more effort into move further up the waste hierarchy. One of the big challenges in developing waste nations is, well, first you've got to collect it, because in some places the waste is still not collected. This is a picture I took in Kathmandu. Collecting the waste is a challenge. It's the first challenge that's got to be done. You then got to realise that there are a large number of people that earn their living from waste. The dust carts that take the waste to the Dandora dump, people will climb up onto the dust cart on its journey to get the high-value plastics off the top. And there is a sort of movement away from just throwing waste away to, well, yes, put it in a dump, but equally you've got to put it into some form of landfill. And if the landfill is an actually engineered landfill, which means it's got a liner in it to stop the liquid running into the ground, and you've put a cap over the top to stop the water going into it when it's full, you can actually drill into that cap. It's a bit like a pressure cooker, and you can extract methane, and you can make that methane into electrical power. And that's the first step that you've got to do. If you wish to aspire to the more integrated solutions, that's next. But again, you've got to have the money to fund it, and that's a big challenge for them. Now, sort of look into the future at some of the drivers that there are that are going to impact in this arena, and some of the questions that we have about those drivers. Well, will population continue to grow? Will that slow? Will it stop? Is a very good question. Obviously, more people is more use of the planet's resources. Will we get warmer? Well, the answer to that is certainly yes. It's just a question of by how much. Will we reduce carbon? Well, we're starting to make some efforts. Hopefully we can accelerate that. Will we rewild the natural world? We are, as you'll find out in a moment, using up the natural world at an alarming rate? Will we decrease the temperature and carbon dioxide in the oceans? That was a coral reef. It's dead now. Will we get our energy from the sun and the moon? Will we ever stop taking fossil fuels out? Question mark. Will we continue to go and live in cities? Over 50% of the population now lives in the urban environment, and certainly if you look at some of the rural areas in developing nations, people are moving into cities to earn a living. Will we still be addicted to consumption? I'm trying to convince my wife that we don't really need to buy a replacement television because the one we've got at the moment works pretty well. I probably fell, by the way. And will we all start consuming materials? Certainly the developing nations, will they get to the point of consuming as much as the United States does? Will our global middle classes grow? It's predicted to grow by a factor of 8 by the year 2060. Obviously, as we become more affluent, we buy more things and use more of the planet's resources. Will we still be driven by the commercial world and our economies based on producing more and more? Will we ever manage to break the linkage between GDP and resource use? And this graph shows that yes, it's a function of population, but equally it's a function more of the goods that we use and make. Will we made to reduce our ecological footprint? And the black line on this graph basically says what the planet can support with the current population. And as you can see, as I've said, the United States and even the UK use far more than other nations. Will we ever solve this globalness and where we are now? If you just take something like a mobile phone, it's probably conceptualized in America, it's probably manufactured in China, and it then gets consumed around the world. And if you say where do they all end up, probably find they end up in the developing nations, and then where do they go? If you look at plastics, virtually all of the large plastic producing companies are based, head offices based in the United States, but we make plastic around the world and it's used globally, isn't it? Will developing nations be able to afford the cost? The red line is basically the cost. The biggest line is in Japan because they set themselves very stringent targets. They've got a lot of population on a small landmass, where if you look at, well, some of the other nations are obviously spending a lot less on their waste management because it's not that sophisticated. Will we consider the full impact of mining our resources? If you take a laptop, it probably takes about 4,000 times its mass in weight in materials to actually get that thing made. And if you look at taking silver out the ground, it now involves somewhere in the region of 540,000 times its weight in resources that have gone into making it. Will we be able to reduce our resource needs? Question mark. And as you can see there, if you look at the built environment, which is the blue line, the construction materials are significant. Will we actually run out of some materials? What are the critical ones? Well, if you look at rare earths on that chart, they're pretty scarce, and we need them. And equally, I'm starting to question about lithium. Lithium goes into batteries. Where are we going to get our lithium from? Will we be able to find a new paradigm? Why is it we don't rent? Why don't we rent our mobile phones so that we return them to Apple and they can then do something with them? Will we find markets for our recycled materials? It is pointless going into the effort of collecting recyclable materials if they don't end up in useful products in the future. And if you look at this little guy, he's not going to solve our issues completely, is he? Will we develop new technologies? I'll talk about this one later, but will we develop technologies to help us? And where will this lead us? It's certainly changed our lives. And where will it continue to take us? And if you look at Sir David Attenborough's life, this is out of his excellent book, A Life on Our Planet, which I recommend you read. It basically says, hey, we've already used up 50%, or we've already used 35% of the natural world, and that's reduced by a factor of 2 in his lifetime. Obviously, carbon's gone up, and obviously, population's gone up. So you ask, where are we currently going? Well, this word, in my view, should disappear, and we should regard everything as a resource. We are trying to move to closing the organic cycle of circulating around and around all the organic material that grows, and we need to do the same with the mineral inorganic resources that we mine and dig out the ground and use, and we've got to continue to recirculate those. And if we can't do that, we must put them somewhere safe. We need to reduce, don't we? We need to design for reuse, design for dismantling, design waste out, or use different materials. We've got to design for reusing, and this is a plasma screen that you can actually take apart. And we've got to recycle, obviously, certainly the materials that we can recycle. We've got to look at our waste stream and refine more materials out of it. This is a plant in Larnaca in Cyprus where they're very clever, and there's if you went to a similar facility in America at the moment, it'd probably be full of Mexicans on a picking line. This mechanically separates 9 streams altogether, and it's pretty impressive. Yes, we can build waste-to-energy plant, and the UK has built a large number of those. I think we've spent somewhere in the region of £7 billion in recent years building infrastructure to help us move away from landfill. But this is probably the most important slide, I think, for these areas. We've got to find some form of repository for the things that we can recycle at the present moment. We've got to put them somewhere safe. If we put them into a landfill, which has got water in it, and it's got organic material in it, it becomes very acidic. So any materials in that probably end up as some form of salt in some years' time. That will end up in the oceans. If we take phosphorus out, make it into a fertilizer, it ends up in the estuaries. And we mustn't put those materials beyond the grab of future generations. So we've got this sort of 6 R's, I call it, which is a combination of things we're doing. And we're trying to aspire to get to this sort of level of 0, which if we can achieve those numbers, we can. But then I ask the question, is that enough? And my simple answer is no. We now know the impact we're having on our home. And you ask the question, where do we need to go? Well, with regard to the circular economy, let's go back. We started, but we've actually gone backwards in the last couple of years, which is not good. If you look at an example, Easter Island was a very vibrant society at one stage, built these lovely statues, which it chopped down the trees to roll the statues around and put them in place. And unfortunately, they managed to chop all the trees down. And when Captain Cook arrived, he described them as a pretty sad bunch because they'd gone from a very vibrant society into basically just getting their food. They didn't have enough trees to actually leave the island, so it must have been a pretty horrendous transition. We've got to move towards balancing the natural world with our existence, because if we fail, there is a possibility of a extinction event on this planet. Fortunately, we've started, and there are various things we look at, and this is a concept called the planetary boundaries, and basically the outer green line is what the planet can sustain, and if we go outside that, we've got a problem. Obviously, climate change we know about, biodiversity loss we know about, land conversion we do, and we do know that we can't continue to put the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus onto land. It's not all bad. If you look at the ozone layer, that was in the red, and we managed to turn it round with legislation and stopping putting CFCs into the atmosphere, and we've pulled that one back again. We need to pull all of them back so that we can survive. Equally, this version of this includes the social element. Well, we need to look at all the elements of our lives, and we need to, as Sir David suggests, approach sustainability in all things. We're equally, the UN Sustainability Goals is helping us go in that direction. But the point I make is we need to treasure our planet's resources. And it needs to be part of a holistic, sustainable approach to the way we live on our home. Because matter cannot be created or destroyed. And if we think someone else is going to bring us some resources, we may have to wait a rather long time. So what needs to be done? Well, we need to realise, as Mr. Kennedy said back in 1963, that, hey, if we've made the problem, we can do something about it, because we have, we're a pretty innovative bunch of people. We need to solve this problem. So I'm now going to talk about and ask you what your awards talk about the opportunities that you have for making a difference. Now you need to stop adding carbon dioxide and remove it from the atmosphere. You need to help develop renewable energy. You need to protect and improve the world's wildness and the oceans. You need to stop sending plastics to the oceans, and you need to help remove what's already there. You need to realise that everything starts with a designer, and I would imagine quite a few people on this conference call realise that they are a designer. We need designers to design things with the future use of resources in mind. We need designers to design things so they can be dismantled and reused on the basis of treasuring the resources for future generations. We need to design solutions for recovering resources on the basis of treasuring the resources for future generations. If you just look at the amount of effort we put into building and manufacturing components, how much effort do we put into designing them so they can be dismantled and have those facilities available to us? You need to consider unforeseen circumstances. Wouldn't it have been good? And I think you can slightly forgive the people because they didn't realise the consequence. But if we thought that through at the beginning, would we really have gone down this route of using fossil fuel? You need to have, if you could have influenced this man to think a little bit about future consequences, because he actually was the man that developed leaded petrol. His company bosses, American corporate in the oil industry, decided that it would like to earn 0.1 cents per gallon of petrol. Decided that was a better route than the other one he suggested of using ethanol. And when he finished that work, he went on to design CFCs, so he's probably caused more environmental damage than any other person. If you look at plastics, did we really think through plastics when we first started using them? Did we really think through when we first started making clothes out of plastic? Because when we wash our clothes, we get microfibers, and those microfibers end up in the oceans. And fish eat them, we eat fish, and we get that plastic in our bodies. Unfortunately, that plastic, when it's in the ocean, likes to attract persistent nasty chemicals as well. So that's not a particularly good place to be, because we now have plastics in all of our watercourses. And I'd like to think that somebody is asking the questions about lithium and batteries, because we're going headlong into making batteries. You need to consider resources in every facet of human activity, from all the organic areas that we do, the inorganic, and including energy and air and water. You need to close the organic cycle. This is a picture of a waste stream that's going to be fed into an anaerobic digestion plant in Belgium. If you want to know what the white things are, they're nappies, because there's a lot of paper in nappies. That's just a question of taking the plastic out once you've put it in the AD plant. But you need to complete this cycle. That cycle's been going well for millions of years. We need to get back so that we do complete that cycle. We need to complete the cycle for all organic materials. Virtually everything we make, we need to be focused on doing that. We need to solve the globalness of the issue, because we do live in a global society and we need to address it globally. Something a bit more specific. You need to separate the residual fraction. Now, we either do it ourselves in our homes, or we help develop solutions to doing it for us. You need to find uses for all of the recycled materials. If you go on Google and put in recycled materials and click images, you just see a series of pictures of plastic bottles and tires. But it's all materials that we need. The built environment particularly. Enormous amount of effort needs to go in that. And you need to develop sustainable ways of living in the urban environment. I think a good example of that is Singapore, and this is the Marina Bay Sands complex, where they've actually started to build a natural forest, a man-made forest, which is pretty impressive when you see it. And the developing nation, we need to help the developing nations, and we need to certainly share best practice and help them through this transition. You need to understand and find a path through the complexity of the problem. And it needs to be a clear goal based on science and engineers. And it is an incredibly complex, this little diagram is just listing the areas that need to be considered when you're thinking about that topic. You need to realize that there is no silver bullet. It's not just a eureka solution. It is going to be a very complex issue. And we need to develop a behavioural change program and a sense of urgency. And before you ask me, it's a water pistol. We've got to get everybody involved in solving this problem. It's not going to be solved for us. You need to help develop and build the infrastructure that's going to help handle these resources. I've mentioned certainly in Germany. Germany are leading the field and saying, right, we are going to treat our sewage waste, and we are going to put the solid residual through incineration process, because we can grab the phosphorus back, and we need to do that, in my view. We need, well, if you look at this, it's a waste to energy plant, but it uses some of its energy to actually generate hydrogen, which it puts into its buses, or the area's buses. We need to look at things, because there are in Switzerland now incinerators that are actually refining gold and precious metals out of the bottom ash of a waste incinerator. Well, when I was there, the gentleman asked me, how do you get the organic material off of a zip? And you think, well, you can do it thermally. So that's got an option. And you need to capture carbon. You can obviously do it off the back end of a waste to energy plant, but you're probably better off to me doing it on a coal-fired power station, because only 50% of the energy in a waste-to-energy plant is fossil fuel derived. The other is organic. You need to help with developing some of these infrastructures. I mentioned, I've shown this picture already. It's a containerized anaerobic digestion plant. So something like a supermarket can put its food waste that it can't sell into there, and it will turn it into electricity and a fertilizer and some water. Another technology I mentioned, pyrolysis, certainly large scale. These two ships that the UK has built have pyrolysis units to process their waste. I think the beauty of a pyrolysis unit, if it can be developed, is that you could actually use it to refine resources back to their original properties. You need to look at, well, hey, we can take waste wood and we can turn it into electricity, as we're doing more of. And there's a facility in Canada that's trying to take waste and turn it into fuels. You need to build on good examples. If you take the Olympic Park in the UK, 98% of the demolition materials in that were reused or recycled. There are moves afoot to actually have some of our infrastructure built so we can reuse it again. And I mentioned Japan. Japan has set itself very stringent legislation with regard to the circular economy. It currently recycles 98% of its metals and 72% of its PET, which is Coca-Cola bottled plastic. And it is, I think it's about 9% of its resources it uses at the moment are from recycled materials. So there are good examples which you need to look at. You need to consume less or reduce population growth. Two pretty difficult ones. But why is it we need to replace things as frequently as we do? And you need to have fun doing the first 20. To conclude, 34 years ago, I joined the waste management sector. Today, I'm part of a new sector that must help society treasure our planet's resources. And this presents considerable challenges and exciting opportunities. It's my passionate belief that our generation must not deprive future generations of our home's resources. And if we just disperse them widely through our planet, we will do that. Asking questions as I have is easy. Asking the right questions is much harder. And finding the answers is a lifetime's crusade that you must embark upon. If you succeed, there is hope. Thank you. Okay, I've finished.
Yeah, thank you. So our first question is, how would you advise a young engineer who understands the issues but would like to be involved in a career supporting this subject of saving our environment? What first steps would you suggest?
What first steps? Understanding the issue, I think, is the first step. Because when you do consider what we're doing with the planet's resources, and you then start thinking, well, what can you do about it? And if you're passionate about it, then work in areas where you can make a tangible difference. Would be my response to that. We need people to challenge the corporate sector of, hey, how are we going to take this apart? We need to ask those questions. We need to be looking at it. The designers need to be considering this. So find yourself in a position where you can have some influence. And then once you're there, stand up and say, we need to do this differently.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what step changes would you like to see happen?
Easy one. Stop subsidising fossil fuels would be a very good idea. A step change. The main one I would say is we need a program. We need to focus on resources. We need some form of global action, some form of legislation. We need to influence the suppliers. If you've just seen what supermarkets have got on, are doing their best to try and remove packaging, or certainly fossil fuel derived packaging. But equally, we need to work on the producers. And we need to work on educating, and certainly the young. And I'm impressed with the young because they do care and they want to see change. So encouraging that would be the step change I would suggest. Stop deforest. Stop people taking down forests. Obviously, realise this problem is not going to be solved by the waste sector. The waste sector is very good at handling the materials that they get presented. This problem needs to be, yes, they've got a part to play, but it's this upstream that we really need to have a step change.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, how sustainable is the waste incineration process?
I think at this present moment, you have a stark choice. You either put the residual fraction, and you've got to do everything you can not to put stuff into the residual bin. This is the black bin, the black bag that you have. Once it's in there, it's dirty, it's contaminated, and trying to recycle it is very, very difficult. So don't put it in there. It's the first thing we must try and do. But at this present moment, 50% of what goes in is organic. So burning that is sensible. It's the 50% that's from fossil fuel that we shouldn't put in there. So it's not until such we've actually made that transition that the role of waste to energy will diminish and will just become waste to energy of organic contaminated materials that we can't recycle. But we're not going to. It's going to take us a number of years to get to the point where we stop putting fossil fuel plastics into incinerators. So they do have a role to play, because it's better to do that than it is to put it into a landfill.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, do you have any information on the potential speed of recovery that can realistically be achieved across the different resources?
No, I don't. I'll be honest on that. This whole concept is one that's pretty early in its stages. Certainly the circular economy, we should be able to get much larger percentage, but how quick we can do it, the sooner we get everybody involved in trying to do it, the better. The speed, I would be guessing. So.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what is the role of waste to energy in a circular economy?
I think I've just as a transition, it's got a role, as I've just said. It's the best. It's higher up the hierarchy than landfill, and it's not until such times as we can actually find meaningful use, for taking the recycled materials out and finding a use for them. Certainly from that packaging and the fossil fuel material which we put in. It's going to be here until such times as we can solve that problem.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, why is Western Europe leading the movement away from the renewable?
Well, I think you've got to think the environmental movement for that. If you take, hey, we're at the top of Maslow's triangle generally in the West, aren't we? And we are concerned about the environment, and those environmentalists have managed to get in a position of power. And I resisted saying one of the step changes I would make is, to stop voting for politicians that don't believe the science of what they're being told. And we did manage to get politicians to realise that there's an issue, and they put the legislation in place. And one of the benefits of the EU has been that there's a unified approach to the environment, and they've set very stringent standards to work towards. There's no legislation coming through with regard to the circular economy. So the sooner that is embedded into the UK, in my view, the better. And that sort of legislation has driven the change, as I said earlier, the UK to comply with the landfill directive, which basically says by the year 2030, I think, we could only put in about 30% of what we put in originally into landfill, and that has driven an enormous amount of infrastructure to be built in the UK in the last 10 years.
Okay, thank you. And do you have a question for the audience?
Well, I think the question, I went to a lecture by a guy called Chris Hadfield, who was the first Canadian to walk in space. And he was asked by someone, well, when he said, seeing the planet really makes you realise that we've got to protect it. And he was asked the question, well, what should the astronauts do then? How are they going to lobby government? And his response was, well, it's possibly not for me to lobby government. It's for me to do whatever I can do to improve the health of the planet. And my question to everyone is, think about what you can do to make a difference, and start that difference now. That would be my question for everyone to go away with. What are you going to do differently to make a difference to help us solve this problem? That would be it.
Well, we have a few more questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Do you see transitions themselves being a problem, such as with EV adoption and the production involved with that, or is that just noise?
I don't quite understand the question. No, can you ask the question again?
Yeah. Do you see transitions themselves being a problem, such as with EV adoption and the production involved with that?
I don't see it being a major problem, and taking small steps and on the easy wins would obviously be the first thing to do, because it is going to take time to generate this change globally. And if we look at what are the things we can do easily and quickly, it is a transition. It is going to take years to do. It's just a question of how many years we've got, really. And I think going back to that question, I think one of the things that I'm going to challenge the Institute of Mechanical Engineers on, and I've got a conversation after this call about it, is what is the Institute of Mechanical Engineers doing about resources? Yes, it talks about the circular economy, but it's not. There are other organisations that are pushing towards that much harder and much quicker. We do need to attack this issue in as many fronts as we can, and we'll go through the transition as quick as we can.
Okay, thank you. Next question is there a problem of countries not working together on recycling best practice?
Is there an issue? What do you mean? Some nations just collecting a load of plastic and boxing it up and sending it to China and saying, "Here you go, recycle that for us," and China eventually getting so fed up with receiving contaminated crap that they said, "We don't want this anymore." And now it's potentially going to nations in the Far East that haven't quite got those regulations in place, and they're quite happy to take it. So we do need a joined up. If we're going to produce recycled materials, it's got to be good quality recycled materials that we know are going to proper uses. So there have been examples in the past where recycled paper was found on a landfill dump in Africa, and the person whose letter it was from London wasn't over impressed. So yeah, we have got to work together. If you look at who uses the raw materials, we've actually got to get the right materials to the right place.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you resolve the problem you have no control of, i.e. population and consumption?
Well, I think we can all do something about consumption, and I quoted the conversation I'm having with my wife at the moment about we've got, to me, a totally adequate big screen television, but she's keen to buy a new one, and you just think, well, why? If what I've got is adequate, why do I need to buy another one? So we can decide what we buy and how we buy it, and as the buyers, we have the ultimate power in saying we want to buy something that you can potentially repair. We don't want to buy items that are just going to be used once and thrown away. Population growth, I think we can help educate, and if we can educate society, and there is a correlation between education, certainly of I'm going to say of women, certainly in developing nations, there tends in well-educated areas, there tends to be less population growth than in non areas. So education is something that we can focus on as well.
Thank you. The next question is, should designers of products not start at the end of the product's life and make the brief that there must be no waste and that all materials must be repossessable?
Totally agree. Yes, we've got to, when we design something, look at it and say to ourselves, how are we going to, what resources have we used? How are we going to get them out? How do we get the gold out of a mobile phone? Well, you can burn it if you want, but maybe that's not the best use. How do we get these materials out? Even asking the question, and it's that to get it through. It's got to be. It's a bigger challenge, isn't it? Because we need to get the customers asking for that as well to influence.
Another question is about your point on renting mobile phones to improve recycling. Is that a popular idea?
We are seeing more. You actually buy a service as opposed to you buy a product. Which more of that, can you actually return the items that have got a large number of raw materials in them, or certainly the critical raw materials? How do we actually do that? So, yeah.
Thank
you. It is. Sorry, no. It is. There are more and more examples of that, and we need to encourage it even further.
The next question is, why have we not improved in the last few years? What went wrong after 2018?
There was a percentage number. I think we've just continued to consume more and more. I I'm not aware of people stopping the circular economy once it started. I think it's more probably the top line's gone up as well. Impact of the virus may have had an impact as well, I suppose, but I'm not aware of why it's gone down.
Thank you. The next question is, can a single person really make a difference considering the lack of legislation, action and political motivation in countries with significantly large populations?
If all the single people decided to do something different, then the answer is obviously yes. And if we could get, just as you take plastic bags as an example, I'm not quite sure the number of the decline in the use of plastic bags has been significant. Nations have put bans on them, but we've put money on them. People don't want to use plastic bags anymore. So, yes, people can make a difference collectively. If we all decided not to use plastic bags, then that would be a good step in the right direction, wouldn't it?
Okay, I think that is all the questions. So thank you, Allan, for giving us this interesting talk. And just a reminder that everyone who has registered will be sent round a recording of the talk after via email. So thank you all for attending and have a good day.